Hi, good afternoon. I'm Jeff Schaff from the Toledo Regional Chamber of Commerce, and I'm happy to host our webinar today as part of the Toledo Regional Chamber of Commerce Business Reboot Series. Katie Hunt-Thomas and Sam Meldon from the Ability Center of Greater Toledo are with us today, and I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourselves.
Hi, Jeff. My name is Katie Hunt-Thomas. I'm the Disability Rights Attorney and Director of Advocacy for the Ability Center of Greater Toledo.
Hey everyone, my name is Sam Meldon. I am the Director of Strategic Engagement at the Ability Center, and we're both really glad to be a part of this.
Thanks again for joining us today. I think this is going to be really informational. So you guys put together a reopen fact sheet for businesses that will help them ensure, as we're getting back to somewhat of normalcy with the COVID-19, after the COVID-19 shutdown, that will help them address some issues that may be affecting people with disabilities. So before we get into that, can we talk a little bit about what the Americans with Disabilities Act is and how it relates to businesses?
So the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, is a federal law that was passed in 1990. It was organized for and lobbied for by folks with disabilities themselves, for about 10 years before it was passed. It was the first major comprehensive civil rights law for folks with disabilities. And the goal of the Americans with Disabilities Act was to change our society to make it accessible to folks with disabilities. A lot of the barriers that people with disabilities face to participating in society were things that could be changed, either with changes in the way we do things, with changes to our physical environment, or with just some attitudinal changes that go along with the law. Title III of the ADA applies to what's called places of public accommodation. So that's anywhere that the public can go. One part of that, the part that we're going to focus on today, deals with access to physical spaces. A lot of folks with disabilities use mobility aids or have different ways of communicating than other people, and so there are provisions under the ADA that require physical spaces to be modified in a certain way so that folks can get in and out of the door and can access programs and services. So the Ability Center, in this time when businesses are reopening, thought it was a good time to talk about what that means for businesses as they're striving to comply with social distancing guidelines.
Great. Yeah, we have so many guidelines from other resources that it makes sense to have something like this as well. Why don't I go ahead and share my screen here so that we can go through the reopen fact sheet real quick. Can you guys see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. I'll let you guys run through it, and if you need me to scroll up or down, please just let me know.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would start with is just to kind of talk about why this was important for us to put together to begin with. Jeff, as you just alluded to, it seems like from the very beginning of this COVID-19 crisis that we all found ourselves in, from the very beginning, there were guidelines about how things were closing and how to interact with various organizations and businesses that we all kind of maybe took for granted the way that we interacted. And then the same thing is true, if not more, as we come out of it. There's all of these guidelines about how to reopen. It's not a switch. It's not just off and then back on. And so when you think about reopening, one of the things that we're acutely aware of at the Ability Center is that many of the folks that we work with, the consumers that we have the pleasure of working with and listening to and just really working with an organization, they don't actually they're not able to take for granted that a certain business or a certain organization is actually going to be open and accessible to them. So in addition to that, when you go to reopen, it could be even more cumbersome or more difficult. And so we wanted to put this sheet together just to say that, if you're running a coffee shop or, an eyeglasses shop or a health clinic or, whatever it might be. As you think about how to reopen with all the social distancing guidelines, let's include the list that Katie will run through here pretty quickly to really just hit on what is going to allow your facility, your business, your organization to be as open and accessible for everyone. And it's been really well received, and Katie did a really good job putting a lot of this information together.
Yeah, I think just adding to that, Sam, as you'll see when we go through this list, this portion of the ADA, the portion that deals with physical access or removing architectural barriers, is very technical and sometimes can be kind of difficult to get through and understand if you don't have a technical background. So I think we also want to make sure the Ability Center is a resource to businesses who are maybe having some trouble moving through that. We have an information and referral line that anyone can call and get some technical assistance. And we also have 3 folks in our advocacy department who have a background and expertise in this area. We also just wanted to let businesses know that we're here for them to reach out to if they have some difficulty working through the technical side of this, and helping them to ensure that as they're complying with social distancing guidelines, they're also complying and working through what's required under the ADA. We're going to start at the top of the document. Part of what we're doing is reminding businesses that as these new social distancing guidelines come out, ADA guidelines still apply. So even though they're applying in a different, maybe a different sort of physical space than normal, they still have to, businesses still have to look at these guidelines as they're moving tables around or as they're moving the inside of their store around. The first thing that we're going to go through is parking. So I think this is one of the parts of the ADA that people are most familiar with. People with disabilities have to be provided with parking spaces that are close to a business. Those are designated as accessible spots. There's some technical regulations that I would recommend people look up if they are creating a new accessible spot. But if entrances or if the way folks are getting into a business is changing because of COVID-19 and because of the social distancing guidelines, businesses still need to make sure that there are parking spaces, the parking spaces that are closest to whatever entrance or exit is being used, that are available for folks with disabilities. And then that there's an accessible route from that parking space into whatever entrance or exit is being used as well. The accessible route includes doors, so any entrances, if entrances are being moved around, maybe to encourage social distancing, that are used must be at least 36 inches wide to accommodate customers in wheelchairs. If things are being rearranged within or without the facility, businesses need to ensure that there's at least a 36-inch wide pathway for customers with disabilities to be able to move around safely and efficiently. Obviously, COVID-19 recommends a 6-foot social distancing guideline that would come from the health department. I would follow their regulations or their guidance, but there should be at least a 36-inch wide path for folks with disabilities, and that's similar. There have to be places for folks who use wheelchairs to turn around in the facility as well. So there should be a T or a 5-foot circle. Again, that 6-foot social distancing guideline, I would rely on the health department for that. But under the ADA, there will have to be turnaround areas for folks who use wheelchairs as well. And so this is inside and outside the facility. If this is, say, a restaurant or a place where some customer service is being moved outside, businesses still have to ensure that there's that accessible path with the 36-inch width, and then turnaround spaces for folks with disabilities. Moving on to seating, if you're a business that includes seating that has tables indoors and outdoors, again, that 36 inches has to be available between tables as well. There has to be a mixture of high top and low top tables to accommodate differing abilities. And then there should be a floor area of 30 inches by 48 inches to accommodate wheelchair seating at tables or counters. Tabletops and counters should be between 28 inches to 34 inches in height to be accessible to a wheelchair. Restrooms are one of the priority areas under the ADA for access. Folks with disabilities pre-ADA often couldn't use the restroom in a business, which really limited their ability to access the community and be independent. So any restrooms that are in a business, there must be enough space for a wheelchair to maneuver around the toilet and sink. There are very technical guidelines for that in the ADA. So I know Jeff has some overview guidelines that we provided that were produced either by the Department of Justice or the ADA Technical Assistance Centers that businesses can use as a guideline. Or they can look it up themselves in the 2010 standards, 2010 ADA standards for accessible design. There also must be one handicap stall with grab bars, or if you only have one restroom, your restroom should have the grab bars installed. That's an overview of things that we thought were important for folks to take a look at as they're opening their businesses in compliance with the new guidelines. But there are some specific COVID-19 recommendations, some which are or are not required by the ADA, but that can make your business and your customer service a little bit more accessible. So some of the things that folks who have called in to us have recommended are that, for example, when people or businesses are putting down tape to mark social distancing guideposts. So for example, I've seen grocery stores that have X's on the floor and tape about where folks should stand as a guidance. If that tape can be tactile so that folks with visual impairments or who are blind can feel it with a white cane. We've had folks who have called in who have found that to be very helpful. The Deaf Services Center has been recommending that especially healthcare workers and businesses that have customer service and a lot of interaction with customers, get masks for their employees that have a clear window in the mouth. And there are a few people who are creating those masks in our region, and there's a couple companies that also mass produce them. And that's for people who either are deaf or hard of hearing and use lip reading as a way of understanding what's being said to them. So masks have ended up being a difficult thing for the deaf and hard of hearing community because you can't see someone's mouth. I think it's also just difficult generally for folks who are used to looking at the way a person's mouth moves when they talk. So one recommendation would be masks that have a clear window in the mouth area. Other things that are found in the ADA, any new signage that's official and permanent should meet ADA guidelines for font size, contrast, and braille. Even if somebody's just creating a temporary sign for opening for COVID-19, I would recommend they look in the ADA for font size and font to get the most readable font for folks who have visual impairments. As businesses rely more and more on their websites, there's also guidance in the ADA about how to make websites accessible to people with disabilities. There are lots of great guides online. And if you go on our website and take a look at this resource we created, there's actually a link to a website that will, for free, review your website and let you know if there are any accessibility issues with it. So just making sure that any online options, anything like that, is accessible to people with disabilities. Ensuring that there's enough space in any waiting areas to meet ADA guidelines, similarly to what we talked about before. I also have heard people talk about coming and having to go into a waiting area that does not have seating, and that being a challenge for some people with disabilities. So ensuring that there's seating in those waiting areas for people with mobility impairments or maybe people who rely on public transit. And then finally, just ensuring that there are accessible options for hand washing. So there are requirements for bathrooms and sinks that you can find in the ADA. Sometimes if things aren't feasible to ensure that they're the right size sink or the right height at this exact moment, there might be alternatives that people want to make available. So just an accessible hand washing station, maybe one that definitely has hand sanitizer that maybe people who can't reach a sink or can't get under a sink can use, ensuring that those options are available as well for customers coming in.
This is all really great information.
Yeah, if I could just chime in here really quickly, the couple things that I would add to maybe to the whole document. I think one of the things that we often talk about at the Ability Center is that, you know, the ADA, which turns 30 this year, by the way. I mean, we're right there, 30th anniversary, which is kind of amazing. While it's the landmark legislation for people with disabilities, it's comprehensive. There's a lot there. So many conversations that Katie and I have and other folks at the Ability Center, sometimes it really comes down to just simply like complying with the ADA. Like if we could just follow those guidelines, we'd be so better off. And at the same time, I love that this document shows, and then there's some other things that we can look at specific to the time, specific to what your business might be calling for. And that really lines up with what we think about at the Ability Center in terms of what might it take to create the most disability friendly community in the country. And this is what it takes. What it takes is all types of businesses, companies, organizations, and leaders coming together and saying, what can I do to ensure that my something, my like whatever it is, my place is open and accessible to everyone. And as you can see, you know, it's more than a ramp. You know,
Yep.
Sometimes it's one thing to get in the building. It's another thing to be able to, you know, engage with everything that's going on in any given facility.
Yeah, I think it's really good information because everyone is becoming more and more innovative with the way that they are able to serve customers with the social distancing guidelines. But it's a reminder that you need to keep other guidelines in line. You can't just get rid of your handicap spaces and use that for patio tables now. And if you're a home improvement store and you're making someone walk all the way to the garden center to be able to enter the building, that could become a disadvantage and a problem for someone who has a disability. So I think these are really great guidelines. I think that you guys are an outstanding resource. And if I'm not wrong, you guys have been in the community for 125 years?
100. This is our
100.
Our centennial year. You think about when we were founded, kind of, you know, with the Spanish flu just right behind us and coming out of a polio epidemic, and 100 years later, here we are. Had a lot of good stuff planned for our centennial, and then this coronavirus popped in. So, you know, we're not new to these kind of global pandemic situations.
Or adjusting to
Right.
the way things are done. You know, businesses have been changing the way they do things. I think the really interesting one is websites and online options, because a lot of organizations right now are posting updates on their Facebook, Twitter, Instagram pages, and not necessarily on websites. But if the website is the place that someone who maybe has a challenge seeing or hearing is going to get that information and it's not updated, it's really important to make sure that it's out there and accessible. So
yeah. And Jeff, just one more thing that I think is really important. So one of the things, so talking about the ADA being 30 years old, you know, the ADA was, you know, updated and amended in 2010, but that was a long time ago as well. So the ADA rules might look different in different situations, and with all this innovation and new things, it's important that they be able to be adaptable to what's going on now. One of the things that is also in the ADA that isn't quite as technical as this, but I think is important to recognize, is that businesses covered by the ADA, which is any business that's open to the public, is also required to make something called reasonable modifications of policies for folks with disabilities. So I think at this current moment, you know, talking about what's happening in the world right now, businesses are really trying to establish very strong and clear policies about COVID-19, which is great. But occasionally those will be a barrier to people with disabilities trying to get in. I think you just mentioned one of the calls we've gotten has been businesses that are large businesses that are trying to comply with social distancing guidelines, and the new path that they set up to get through their building ends up making the new path a much longer path than what would ordinarily be done for a business. A lot of ADA guidelines are intended to sort of shorten that distance to the door for folks with disabilities, because it can be very difficult for someone with a mobility impairment or someone who uses a manual wheelchair to travel long distances. In those circumstances, businesses are allowed and actually are required to make modifications to these policies where it's necessary because of a person's disability. So, like, for example, I know a lot of businesses are setting up hours that are specific for folks with disabilities and aging individuals. That's wonderful. Maybe in those circumstances, they can pay a little bit extra attention to the distance folks are moving, that kind of thing. There also should be an ability for a person with a disability who's struggling to comply with one of the new guidelines to contact them and just ask for a little flexibility and exception. And that's something that they would be required to do under the ADA.
Great. I think that covers what we were looking to cover today. I know your team has provided us with some really great resources for people that we will make sure is included on our website when we post this, and the blog that we post about it, and on social media as well. But if someone has a specific question or wants to have an actual review of their business, they can contact you directly through the Ability Center website, abilitycenter.org, or the general phone number.
Yeah, that's right. We have a general phone number that goes to our information and referral specialists, very knowledgeable folks, and they can either answer questions or get you to the right person. And then our website also has a live chat, so folks are welcome to contact us through the website as well.
And
Great.
I would just say to any of your, any chamber members, any organizations, companies, businesses, you can also reach out directly to myself. You can, be in contact with any one of us. When you think about my role is to create partnerships and figure out how we can work together. And the thing I would say, and Jeff, you said it several times, and I appreciate that you did. We are a resource to this community in this respect. We don't expect anyone to be doing more than what we would be doing, with them. We're in this work together in so many
Sure.
ways. And even if we don't have someone that's going to come out and provide a physical space audit of some kind, we have resources and connections that can help make that happen. And so it might just be a conversation, but whatever it is that we need to figure out how to make this community the most disability friendly in the country, we're up for that task.
Well, we're excited to continue to partner with you guys. You're a great organization. And I think that this is going to be a conversation that we continue well into the future. And we look forward to be able to celebrate with you maybe next year, your 100th anniversary 1 year late. Not the most ideal situation, but we're all making do with what's going on. And I think this resource guide, the reopen fact sheet, is going to be really helpful to people. And I hope that you guys get quite a few calls so that you can go out and help them. So I want to thank you, Katie and Sam, for your time today. And we look forward again to working with you in the future. Stay tuned for more Toledo Regional Chamber of Commerce Reboot series webinars, and hopefully we'll be able to meet with everyone in person very soon. Take care.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Jeff.
You're welcome.